No real remarks. I just want to appreciate the input from President and note with great interest the observation that was made about how poverty limits or restricts choices or the making of choices. In which case, the reference then goes to if our young people have to make choices with regard to having marrying first or having a child or not, poverty does influence those acts of choices. And invariably, that sent me back to my family. My father was a carpenter. My mother was a trader in vegetables. So by European standards, they were not wealthy, but there were 10 of us, 10 children, and they still managed to put all of us to school to a point of university and all of that. So the thing in my mind then was, I understand how poverty can influence choices that people have and make, but I think there's also then the thing also about sacrifice, which comes in strongly because I don't see how the carpenter and the vegetable trader could have taken care of 10 children if they didn't have to, make a lot of sacrifices. So I was just wondering whether, alongside this principle, economic principle of, choices influence, poverty influencing choices, there could be, we can evoke some other principle to, to balance that or to attenuate it.
Oh, there are certainly many, many more factors influencing this choice. That's why I said it's a complex choice. But poverty, we can't, let me put this different way. Can we say that no matter what the economic status of a family is, the choice of having a family and a child is indifferent to that? So the idea is that the economic situation affects this decision. Whether it's a primary factor or not, we don't know. I've seen several analyses. For example, and it's a debatable issue, by the way. People would say, no, what is more important may be the spirit of sacrifice, or even I would say the what sort of cultural side one belongs to. Certainly, for example, in many prosperous societies, for many decades, to have a family was considered somewhat humiliating for a woman. The woman was supposed and was prized only because she had the possibility of having her own career. I remember myself when in the early 70s, I went to the United States with a scholarship, and I was just married. And then we were in these sort of university parties, and one professor asked my wife, what do you do? And she said, I'm wifing. And because she was aware that it was considered somewhat, she was looked down for this choice. So she better be a joke about that. But so that was the climate in the 70s in the United States, especially in some parts of the United States, not all of it, of course. But we have to be aware that poverty limits choices in a variety of ways, many choices. The life is just narrower. It's more constricted. And we can certainly elevate ourselves thanks to grace, thanks to our spirit of sacrifice over this constraint. But it is a fact that while we live, we are limited if we are poor, or we are more limited if we are poorer. So I don't think that take care of this would solve all the issues. Also, when we talk about poverty, it's really in this context, what we want to what I think at least, we want to give our young people is a bit of security. That's why I say a good job, or a secure job, and a house. And I think, if, for example, in Italy, certainly, again, as soon as in the 70s, in that age, as soon as the constraint from the urban constraint, in other words, the ability for young people to go and live elsewhere from or far from the house of their parents started binding, and still does, by the way, it's maybe a chance, maybe just a coincidence, where we saw the poverty, the family rates, the birth rates going down. Hi, Jeff. Where is it? I haven't seen you before. Ciao.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for your steady hand in guiding Italy and Europe and the world, which is so essential. I wanted to ask you about the war. What precautions are we taking to prevent this from escalating to a nuclear war? And I mention this because every day the rhetoric becomes even more extreme on both sides. Exuberant NATO rhetoric that we are going to defeat an adversary with 1,600 nuclear weapons, and I don't even know what the concept means. And on the other side, the threat of nuclear weapons being used, stated almost daily. So it seems to me we're right at the brink of disaster, but I don't hear peacemaking rhetoric almost anywhere in the world right now. And I wonder, since you are so important for the world, what you would suggest among the peers that are confronting the worst nuclear threat since the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we're getting closer to the brink.
Yeah, I think we ought to do more work on the peace rhetoric. We've done a lot of work on the war rhetoric. We are doing a lot of work on the war rhetoric. But it's difficult. Why? Well, first of all, things have changed. I remember that at the beginning of the war, before the war began, I had a chance to talk to Putin. Frankly, intimately, I felt like it would have been useless, because one doesn't take 200,000 soldiers in fully equipped for fighting and killing, and then says, I've joked. But I kind of tried to tell him, don't do it. And he was pretty polite and on the phone. Then we had agreed that in a few days we would talk again, and then he launched the war. Then I, again, after 2 months, asked him, while the thing developed, I asked myself, is it worth talking to him again? And so in the end, I said, well, maybe one should do it anyway. And we talked again. And he seemed to be extremely, I would say, he was basically confident that negotiations would improve, that the situation could be brought to a standstill. The tone, especially, was very conciliatory. And so we left each other saying, I'm going to call you next Tuesday. And then we saw Bucha and the horrors of Bucha. So it's not easy to, in other words, to work on a more effective peace rhetoric does take an enormous amount of faith that what one does, it's not a waste of time. That in spite of all the evidence, in spite of all the history of this country, one should try to talk to him. And there is no other, by the way, That's where everybody is agreeing. There's no other person one can talk to. The whole thing is really masterminded by one person. At least that's what we see. Probably it's not true, it's not correct, but at least that's what we and everybody else who does these negotiations sees. That's one thing. The second thing is that I think one is going to be very careful here, because there is lots of people who are saying, oh, it's a mistake to help Ukraine to defend itself. If they had not defended themselves, the war would be over. But they have chosen to defend themselves. And they don't want to be in submission and slavery, so they've chosen to defend themselves. And then our choice is, do we let them down, let them be invaded, let become whatever, or help them? And we've chosen to help them. So I'm basically convinced that if Ukraine is successful in defending itself, peace will come. If this drama will end into a defeat of Ukraine, we won't have peace. We'll have occupation, and it's different from other cases. What Putin is doing is basically what the Soviet Union has always done in Hungary, in Poland, in Czechoslovakia, in Chechnya, in Georgia, in many other cases. But in those cases, there was a security apparatus that they would take control of as soon as the invasion would be victorious. And so the pattern is always the same. We invade, we win, we kill the opposition leader, and then we take control of the security apparatus. And through that, they could control the population, the people, the resistance. In Ukraine, there isn't anything like that. So there's first of all, countries is much bigger than the other cases, and the population would continue resist. So that's why today, the more informed observers would say that this is not going to end quickly, that we may be facing a long period of violence, destruction, and unless they can reach a place where they can have a negotiation, a treaty. And we are certainly, I did say this since the very beginning, we're certainly there ready to help both parties to reach a peace. For what Italy can do, we are there. And we told everybody that we want to be there. So I hope I answered, Jeff, but your question is really difficult. Thank you. Thank you.